Wow, this is extremely exciting for this mum from the burbs, let me tell you. I have been doing a little bit of public speaking in Australia and I didn't sleep well last night because, to be honest, not out of nerves, this is actually my favourite thing to do now, which is amazing really, based on the fact that this was all a big accident. But now I get to call myself an international public speaker, so thank you, New Zealand. So it all began with a boy in a dress. This is a poster that was displayed throughout schools in 2010 in Victorian schools. And I was on the internet one day, on Facebook, on social media, as us mothers often do, and I saw a mother speaking up about this program that had hit Victorian schools. And she was called a liar. She was a mum from Frankston, and she talked about the fact that at their school, there'd been this poster of a boy in the dress, and that her son had been told that from now on they could choose to wear the uniform of their choice. And she was publicly humiliated and slaughtered online, as they do, as the activists do. But I also was at a school. I put my oldest son in a school. He was in his first year of high school. And I was one of those mums. We're probably countercultural mums at the moment. I make sure I get in the school and I volunteer on the canteen at the kiosk, and I do reading, and I try really hard to be involved and engaged. And I knew this mum wasn't lying because I got to see that these posters were up there in the school I was in. And so this led me on a little bit of a search. I thought, I'm going to look at this curriculum. Now, at that time, I could read the entire content of the curriculum, and I was absolutely horrified. Up until that point, let me tell you, I was like most Australians and perhaps most New Zealanders. I was asleep. Didn't really have any reason to feel like I had to be concerned, or that there was any hidden agendas, or that I was under threat. I was enjoying my freedoms. My life was pretty good. When I read this curriculum, I became quite concerned. I decided to speak to other parents about what I'd seen. I'd often get blank stares and people would dismiss me. But I was basically what you'd call a lounge room activist. I'd sit around the kitchen table with my friends, I'd get groups together, and I'd start to tell them what was going on. I went to the school after my child had told me what had happened. He got in the car one afternoon and he told me that he'd had to craft a vagina. He was 13 years old. It was out of plasticine and Play-Doh and pipe cleaners, and he was uncomfortable with this. And as I was reading the curriculum and seeing what was going on, I was also uncomfortable with this. So I made an appointment with the principal, but I was told, sorry, Mrs. Rancie, you don't get an opt-out. As soon as you opt into any school, public school, you've opted into the lot. And this is what we're teaching. She said, look, I didn't go to teaching school to do this. I didn't want to become a teacher to be teaching these things, but it comes from the government, and this is what we have to do. So I decided I would then look at where this had come from and how I could change it, and my lounge room activism became political activism. Something I'd never ever thought I'd do. I didn't even know what political party I really supported, to be honest. But I looked at their policies and I thought, that's it. I'm going to get in there and I'm going to make a change, because this isn't right. Amongst all this going on in my private life, I was an unknown mother, and I also had my own little Facebook page, and I do my little updates, but of course, like most people, I didn't want to offend anyone. I didn't want to say anything that would get me, be uncomfortable for family members, many of them who have very different views, values and beliefs that I do, or friends as well. We all know what happens when you pop your head up and speak out. So I thought I'll make this page and I'll call it Political Posting Mumma, and it can be completely separate to my main page, and this way I get to have a voice and I can start to tell people, and the people that share my views and values and ideas, they can come on this page with me and they can, we can all share our views together, and I don't have to, offend anybody. And so I put this page together, Political Posting Mumma, and on one day I was so frustrated at the fact that felt like I was screaming out to an empty world that was not wanting to listen. Parents that just weren't getting it. And so in frustration, I thought, right, I'm going to tell, I had about 300 followers on my page, what's going on. And so I literally donned my red lippy, went out on the back of my deck on the veranda, right, and I grabbed my iPhone and I held it up and I started talking. And I told my story. And it wasn't scripted. It was about 15 minutes long. I'll tell you, I've never actually looked at it again. I couldn't believe how much I kind of click and and but anyway, that's what I do. But the bigger point was, by the end of the day, that video had gone out to the world. By the end of the night, it had hit 1.1 million views, and now it has had 4.8 million views. And it was on like Donkey Kong, let me tell you. Uh-oh. Suddenly, my views went out to the world, and concern was shared by many. I had a mum message me from Peru, and she said, "You go, Mum." She said, "They tried to bring this in our schools in Peru and we marched it out of the streets." And she showed this picture of 50,000 in the streets holding up signs. They marched it out, and I thought, yes, we're going to do the same thing here in Australia. Hasn't quite happened yet, but the fight is going on, let me tell you. So I can't tell you basically how life-changing that video was for me. I can't put it into words adequately, because within a week I was suddenly on Andrew Bolt. So I went and got a new outfit, and as you do, and I got my hair done, and I turned up, and Andrew Bolt is one of our only conservative media commentators, as many of you may be aware. We don't have a voice. Very strong voices. Miranda Devine, who you'll hear from later, is another one of our amazing warriors, but he gave me a voice. Next, I was on the Mark Latham show, and I got to expose what was going on. So when this video went out into the world, suddenly the trolls came. They came crawling from everywhere. Let me tell you, my inbox was full. The comments were just non-stop, and it was absolutely terrifying. There were thousands and thousands. Within the first week, I had 79 actual death threats. I had my home address put on a page of 25,000 people, encouraging the activists to turn up to our house. I went to the police, who said, "Not much we can do if you don't like it. Why don't you stop being an activist on this issue?" Some of the trolling, and I've blocked it out. I'm sorry I come here today with a pretty awful message. I've sanitised as much as I can. Even the content's going to be pretty awful. But this is some of the stuff that you're exposed to as soon as you speak up. And I'm sure many of you have experienced this as well. You give an opinion online and they come. So they talk about Jill Ma was one of the worst murder cases our country had. I'm not even, don't expect you to read them all. Here you go. What's this say? Do we have a roaming mic? Yep. Sorry. A bit of a walker and a talker. Are we on? Yep. Yep. So, will this pile of garbage wrapped in skin take questions, or will she speak her lies in a heavily controlled echo chamber? So there would be events and they would turn up. We have, a strong presence of Antifa. I've been spat on. And the abuse was terrifying. But you've heard about drop bears in Australia? Have you heard about mama bears? So something happened to me. Something happened to me when they started to attack me, and even the Department of Education came out and they basically went step by step through my video trying to debunk all the truths that I'd exposed. I didn't like being called a liar. I knew what was going on. And so I started to expose, and so I put the links up of the curriculum because I thought, you know what? If every mother and every father who cares and loves their kids as parents do, good parents do, if they see this, regardless of what their views or values are, they will not be okay with this. And so I started to expose it. Now, luckily, I'd seen that when that first mama had spoken out, they'd hidden the content. So I'd taken all these screenshots on my phone. And so the same thing happened. They started hiding the links. They'd break. Error 404. And I thought, no. Screenshot. Screenshot. And here's some of the screenshot I'll go through in a moment. But basically, and I'll show you some of the evidence that I exposed. And I know that it's happening here in New Zealand. Because when my video went viral, here I was thinking, we've got this premier who's Marxist, who's outsourced the curriculum to a team of Marxist transgender activists. But when that video went viral, I was suddenly connected to the worldwide movement. And I saw in Canada, there was a mother. I don't know what it is with blonde middle-aged mothers, but there's a few of us, apparently, around the world doing the same thing. It was uncanny. A mother in Canada speaking out against their program, SOGI, which is Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Program. There was a mother in America called the activist mummy. Many of you may be familiar with her. She's one of my absolute heroes. She also was speaking out. Mama bears across the world were starting to rise up. And this crossed religious divides, political divides, any divide, or, you know what? You do not mess with a mother and her child and get away with it. There is something within us that wants to protect our children. And it's the same with you dads. And I talk a lot in terms of mama bears and mama warriors, but amen to those wonderful dads. I am pro-dad. I am so pro-dad. They're getting smashed. They're getting absolutely smashed because of this cultural Marxist PC movement. And it's intentional. And we know that. We know that the family is being attacked. It is very, very intentional because they cannot change the structure of our society and our world with strong families standing in the way, stopping them. So this is an attack on family. This is an attack on children. This is an attack that will destroy the very, very fabric of our society. And you know what? We are actually in a war. There is no doubt about that. Yeah, Nana and Papa warriors as well. Yeah, we're rising up, and there's been a massive rising up in Australia. And I've seen in New Zealand that you have these programs, And many of you are here today are probably already starting to be woke. You already know a bit of what's going on. I hope to wake you up even more today. I hope that every single one of you leaves this conference ready to battle, because it is a battle. This is a man by the name of Dr. John Money, and this is the Reamer family. Brian and Bruce. Unfortunately, Bruce had a severely botched circumcision operation, and Dr. John Money decided that he would test his theory of gender theory, that gender was not actually a biological construct, that it was a social construct, that gender was in your mind. And so they decided to make Bruce into Brenda. And this is where this entire theory that gender is fluid, have you heard of this? Gender fluidity. It's not just that you can be a boy or a girl. It's that you can be any gender you want. You can make up your gender. It's how you feel. So this is where it's come from. Now, the story, though, doesn't completely get told, because what actually happened was that at around the age of 9, 10 and 11, Brenda started to feel like he was actually the boy that he was born. And devastatingly, at the age of 38, Bruce, who'd been Brenda, became David, and he committed suicide. This is where the entire programs that they're pushing into the schools come from, Dr. John Money. Now, when laws change, society changes, and this is what I discovered. I didn't know where it had come from or how I could stop it. But this is why my battle is really about engaging us to be politically active. Something that some of us may not feel comfortable with, but we're going to have to get over that feeling, because the reality is, if we're not in those places where policies change, if we're not there to uplift and strengthen the pro-family policy makers, then those spaces will be vacated, and those who have another agenda for our society will step into those roles, as we've seen happen, and they will change policy. And suddenly we'll be going, hang on a minute, why can boys come into girls' toilets? Why have I lost my voice? Why are they claiming that the Bible itself is hate speech? It goes on and on and on. So the Sex Discrimination Act changed. Basically, they added in 2013 an amendment where sexual orientation, gender identity and intersex status became protected. And that's where it all comes from. The law basically changed. So you might want to disagree with it, but when the law is against you, and you can disagree with it, and we should disagree with it, but when the law is against you, there are consequences. The genderbread person you may all be familiar with, being taught throughout schools and in New Zealand schools. And here's some of the genders. Now, this was actually a screenshot. It's not a very great one there, and you can't really read them. There was 121 different genders named. And this was in our curriculum, which they've since hidden. My favourite one on there is eco-gender. It's a gender that is so personal to you, only you know what gender you are. And it seems absolutely absurd. And I think a lot of people initially go, this can't be happening, it's absurd. But it is happening. And laws are being weaponised. And children are being confused. This is the Gender Fairy book. This is rolled out through kindergartens all across Victoria. And it says, only you know whether you're a boy or a girl. No one can tell you. It's basically the story of a little girl who likes to play soccer. I used to play soccer. I'm a woman. I was a girl. I mean, this is the issue that they're battling, is that this doesn't actually work for everybody. And in fact, you hear about the LGBTQ being this all, strong community. That's not the reality. Because I'll tell you, there's a massive movement of lesbians who are speaking up and out against this. They're called trans exclusionary radical feminists, the TERFs. The TERFs. They say, no, gender is biological. And so there's all kinds of divisions starting to happen in this cohesive group. So here you go. This is Gender is Not Uniform. You should do a bit of research yourself. Check your policies. Any of you who have school children or grandchildren at school, get online while you can and hunt around. It takes a little bit of investigative work, but do it, because I'll tell you, you're going to have these same policies. Gender is not uniform. Along with the schools being corrupted with this gender theory, gender fluidity, we have this overwhelming sexualisation of children, where I actually exposed this online. A mother sent it to me and she said, look at this. This is Whittlesea Library and they have drag queen story time. And this is in libraries all across our country. And it's coming for your shores. It's here. There you go. I saw it happening in America. And I guess this is why I decided to jump into the No campaign. I initially didn't want to touch it because I knew, right? There were consequences. You're going to be the face of this. And why is it? Why is it that it was 5 mothers who were the face of the No campaign? Where were our politicians? And I counted it an absolute honour to stand up and speak for marriage. Traditional marriage. It was an absolute privilege and honour, as has all of this been. As hard and as difficult as it has been, I'm speaking the truth. This is wrong. So here you go. These are the TERFs that are speaking out. There's a massive movement happening. Comprehensive sexuality education is the big umbrella that all of this fits under. And here's a man by the name of Alfred Kinsey. There's a fantastic documentary called The War on Children, and I would highly recommend you all look it up on YouTube. But basically, this explains what's going on. I truly believe that we are in the next stage of the sexual revolution. I truly believe that our children are in grave danger. The laws are changing. The ages of consent are changing. And there's this children's rights movement being thrust upon us, where children have these rights to basically separate them from their parents. And the laws are changing this for us, and especially in Victoria, which I'll go into in a moment. But this is Alfred Kinsey, and this next slide I'm going to show you is one of the most horrific pieces of research you would ever see, and it is online and you can find it. This is actual pedophile research from the Kinsey Institute. And these are little babies. And the data there is how many orgasms they had. And I mean, I'm not actually going to talk about it. I get very emotional whenever I do, but you can look this up. There's a wonderful lady. She's another mama activist by the name of Judith Reisman, who's done some fantastic work in this area. But basically, this is where the entire curriculum has come from. What they determined was that children are sexual beings from birth, and that children are entitled to sexual pleasure. And if you look at the curriculum that they've put throughout the school system, And our children's precious minds are in the hands of these people. If you look at it, you'll see this is exactly what they're doing. Sex education has gone from being about protection and prevention to being about pleasure and promiscuity. This was the head of the department. His name is Gary Dowsett. And he's the head of the department where our government decided to outsource all of Australia's sexuality curriculum to. And there are academics like this around the world, in Canada and America, who have also creating this research. And so you see the issue here. He says, first we have 3 legal social questions to win. Custody rights for gay men and lesbians, the legal right of pedophiles and their young loves, and finally, the sexual rights of children as a whole. This was, it's a bit blurry and I'm kind of glad it is actually. It was a little bit intentional. This was a worksheet that was handed out to students. They've hidden it now. But basically, they had to tick the box of the sexual experiences they'd had. And you'll note here, there's no option for no. Oh, you've got a fridge. For frigid? I don't know. Don't know what conclusion you draw, but... And they have things like anal sex. And then we've got cuddling. And then analingus, which is oral anal sex. I had to Google that. And these worksheets are being handed out, and then the teachers are asked to collect them. In my video, I exposed the fact that they were teaching children, they had these lessons on masturbation. And I was called a liar. I had politicians come out and do videos, and activists come out and speak out and say, rubbish, we're not teaching that. And I knew they were, because I'm engaged with my kids. I love my kids. They are my all, and we have a relationship. And they know that if they feel uncomfortable, they have a right to feel uncomfortable. And my daughter recorded the lesson, which was then exposed on the Mark Latham show. And this was a teacher teaching them how to masturbate as a girl, very graphic. And you could hear the kids in the class were uncomfortable. There were a bunch of 13-year-olds. They weren't separated into boys and girls. She's no longer at the school, but... These are the links that are live links. There was some pushback, and the federal government did actually remove these dodgy links from the federal curriculum, but our Premier decided, this is where you have to know your politics, at a state level he decided that he would fund it because he doesn't listen to bigots. Now and that's a direct quote from his Twitter. These links, which are all live, they actually proved that through one of the websites, which is -18, there were pedophiles accessing school children. And yet this is still live. Here's the resource kit for all the schools with all the posters that were handed out. This is catching on early. So this is the tricky bit. They call it Safe Schools. Well, I soon discovered that it has multiple names and multiple ways that they implement these programs. And so that's what you need to be on the lookout for here in New Zealand. I've heard of Mates and Dates, and there's other programs that people have revealed to me. I've got some New Zealand followers who've kept me in the loop. And there are some experts amongst you rising up. But basically... this is in primary school, and it's all about sexual pleasure. And here's a curriculum where the policy changed. So this is where it talks about having shared accommodation. Sorry, I can't read that very well there, but shared accommodation so that you could choose that accommodation can be of the gender of their choice when they go on school camps and things. And I found out that actually already happened with my son at the school he was at. He was at a different school. It was the pilot program then, so I knew nothing about this program, but they'd already had gender shared sleeping arrangements for teenagers. We have gender neutral toilets, and both of my children have been in bathrooms at their school where the opposite gender has come in and used the bathroom. Chest binding, how to bind your chest. So this was also in the curriculum. It's a Safe Schools resource, and it recommends how to bind your chest. And I didn't have the other one, which was for penis tucking. I won't put that picture up there. Covering your tracks. Here was teaching children how to hide their browser searches from their parents. Because if your parents are bigots, you need to be able to access this stuff, right? This is pretty much what it says. Cover your tracks. And don't think this is just Australia. I want to remind you, this is global. This is going on. Here's Trans Femme Hangout Day, where some of the activists offered to pick the children up from the train station to take them to these events. Here you go, gender fluidity. Gender is how you feel. Now, this is an exercise where they ask the students to imagine that aliens have arrived in their classroom from another planet. Explain that these aliens are genderless. Tell students that the aliens want to know how to tell whether someone is male or female. I mean, the temptation, if there weren't so many of you here, to get you all up and do this, like, really? In a classroom situation? Safe Schools, by the way, was marketed as an anti-bullying program. So if you hear about any anti-bullying programs, please be aware. SAFE is actually an acronym, and it stands for Same-Sex Attracted Friendly Environments. They're very good with their words. These Marxists, the play on words. Who doesn't want a safe school for your kids, right? Sexual identity and sex are different. These are part of the resources. So you've got sex, you've got sexual identity, two different things, and then your gender identity, different again. Okay, so sexual identity, so it says there are lots of different components that make up your sexuality. You can be attracted to a whole spectrum of masculinity, femininity, both or even none. Your feelings, behaviour and identity aren't always the same. If the example below was a girl, they might identify as a lesbian. If they were a boy, they might identify as straight. Our education standards in Australia, which used to be amongst the highest in the world, are now below Kazakhstan. They have dropped. They're spending so much time social engineering our children and sexualising them at the extent of reading, writing and arithmetic. So we've got queer, pansexual. Anyway, I'll skip. So if your gender aligns with the gender you are cisgender. They've even given us all a term. And here was some cultural Marxist lessons, that's my heading, but this is to basically, if someone does something you don't like, call them a homophobe. And if that doesn't work, get a group around you and get them to call you a homophobe. We see this all online, yeah? So, what is cultural Marxism? For many people that might be a more familiar term. When I first started learning about it, I had no idea what was going on. Basically, how I explain it and how I see it working, and this will explain the society we're now facing, is that with cultural Marxism, with classic Marxism, it was the haves and the have-nots, but it was based on economics. Now we have the haves and we have the have-nots. The have-nots are anyone who has an identity group that they can belong to. That could be based on race, sexuality, religion, but you're basically a minority that cannot be touched. And the haves are generally Christian, white, male, or you can be any of those, fit into any of those categories. But you're the haves. And so there's a real division here. You can't talk about these groups. And they want to separate us and divide us. They want to break down Judeo-Christian values, which have provided freedoms. They want to demonise fathers and men, because who do you think is going to go to war on this stuff? So this is actually what's going on. This is very, very personal for me. I don't normally share my story, but I was talking about it last night. So listening to that marijuana story, I grew up in a home filled with marijuana, of brokenness. I was given marijuana at 11 years old by one of my parents. I was drunk the first time at 4. I was in a brothel at 6 when we were escaping a domestic violence situation. At 20 years old, my life was saved and I dedicated my life to Jesus Christ. And I'm a cycle breaker, as many of you all here are, I'm sure. There was absolutely no way I was going to let anyone harm my kids. I've protected them, I've sheltered them. Been married 19 years in a loving, committed relationship to my husband, and we adore our family. They are our priority. And so when the government decided to mess with my kids, you betcha it was war. And when those death threats came, and I remember a week into it, and I was standing in the kitchen with my husband, and I said, honey, they're gonna kill me. They're actually gonna kill me. Someone has, I've exposed something accidentally, and you know, they're gonna turn up, and I'm scared. And he put his arm around me and he said, it's all right, honey. Ben Shapiro's alive. And then he said, but you know what? What's the alternative? We can't stop. Now, 3 weeks ago, I was actually sued for defamation. I ended up settling out of court, and it was for $100,000. We're a middle-class family, 6 of us. We're not wealthy people, but the alternative was to go to court and fight it, and that would have been a lot more, because the reality is the laws are not in my favour. So the defamation was in law. It wasn't anything I personally said. In fact, I was told by my legal counsel that it would be the perfect freedom of speech post, but where I got into trouble is that when you post anything on the internet, you are also responsible in law in Australia, and you may need to check that here. Facebook is global, for all the comments underneath. And so I missed some comments from a post from 18 months ago, and so they sued me. And so that was pretty hard to take, you know. But I'm actually grateful. I'm grateful for this experience. I'm grateful that I get to stand up. At the end of the day, it's only money. I've put a fundraiser up on my page, and in 24 hours, the good people of Australia have already donated over $10,000. Which is incredible. But But basically they will try and shut us down because there is an agenda here. I believe with my whole heart and soul that family is the fundamental unit of a healthy society. It is absolutely the strength of a nation. And they want to destroy it. And we can't let them. Here's my beautiful family, and these are the people I fight for. This is the state attacking the family. They're being denied information about their children's health or medical treatment. So we actually have doctors in schools. This freaked me out. And keep your eyes open for this, because there was no media coverage about this. They just got snuck in 100 doctors' clinics into our schools in Victoria. And at the age of 12, we have a law called the Mature Minor Law. You heard about it with the euthanasia discussion that happened. The Mature Minor Law comes from a law in the UK called Gillick Competence. The Mature Minor Law basically emancipates your children from parental rights, where the government, where a school teacher, where a doctor can deem your child a mature minor if they deem you to be a bigot, if they deem you to be unsuitable or incapable of making those decisions. One of my very, very dear friends who I have found through this fight, she was just a mum, and what happened is I became this conduit for all the stories across the country because this was happening and people had nowhere to go. And they started messaging me, and this one mum messaged me, and her daughter at 15 years old had been raped. At the time she had read the diary and she thought that it was a gang rape because it said they, and she found out that was actually their gender pronoun, so it was an individual. But this daughter was traumatised and ended up in a situation where the activists were flown to the school and started to think. She'd never thought she was a boy before, and gender dysphoria is a real psychological condition, and it's very distressing. I also have very many trans friends who I've met through this who are standing up with me, who are saying, how dare they do this to kids? This is not an easy path. But this individual had never had any concerns with this, but of course, you know, she was traumatised and she was fed this information, and without the parents' knowledge, she was given hormone treatment, and they set up a GoFundMe to have her breasts removed. And she's now been dumped by the activists, and she's, 20 years old, and the mother is trying desperately to bring back that relationship. But this is actually what's happening. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to just skip through a little bit here. So this teaches them how to transition gender at school. So they've got the medical facilities. They also have lawyers in schools. And the question is, who owns the children? And we've all let it happen because we're all asleep at the wheel. It is like the frog in boiling water. This hasn't happened overnight. This has been an agenda. This has been many, many, many years of push, 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 push. And this is how far they've got. And when you see a drag queen in a library in America with children lying on top of him, as has recently been exposed by the activist mummy, are we going to wake up? Are we going to stand up? My grandfather fought in World War II, and at 19 years old he was on a ship and lost all his mates, and he was traumatised from that for the rest of his life. But I remember thinking, I don't think I could ever go to war. Ugh. And I had no reason to. Is that time? Sorry, someone's phone. I had no reason to. It is time. But I tell you what, I've got a reason to now. They're attacking homeschooling too. So sometimes people say, homeschool your kids, and that is an option. But they're going after homeschoolers. So here you go, Mates and Dates, a similar program. I know I met someone from Nigeria who said they tried to bring it here and we wouldn't let them. This is all over the place. Dutch evangelist Corrie ten Boom said, "It's a poor soldier indeed who does not recognise the enemy. The key to victory, both in natural and spiritual warfare, is to clearly identify the enemy and to understand his character and methods." We have to see what's going on and we have to realise that this is huge. We cannot be silent. We cannot just, sit back and allow these people to take all that we have from us. We must put on the armour of God. We must defend what is most precious. We are the gatekeepers of our children's safety. We're the gatekeepers of their minds. We're the gatekeepers of their physical safety, but perhaps more importantly, we are the gatekeepers and the protectors emotionally and spiritually of our children. And it's not just our children, it's all children, right? Because my children, they're going to be okay. They got a mum and dad there holding guard, looking out, watching out. We have dinner around the table. We have discussions. We talk about gender. My 4-year-old, who's actually up in the back of the room, he often says, "There's 2 genders, boy and girl." The teenagers may have indoctrinated him, yes, to the truth. They'll be okay, but it's all the children and grandchildren, absolutely. So when our children are under attack, we go to war. What does war look like? So I told you I'm a Christian, right? What does that look like? We're taught to forgive and to love people, to be peacemakers, and that a soft answer turns away wrath. I believe in this message also. But we must understand that the war we're facing is a spiritual war. I'm just going to go back a little bit. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. That's what we're fighting. The evil in this world is absolutely relentless. It's ever searching for new ways to spread its influence in our families, our communities, our culture, and our government. Our mission in this world is not just to be there, but to try to make it better. To be a light to the world. We're not actually meant to disengage, to withdraw, to cloister ourselves and say to the rest of the world, "A pox on all of you." I'm actually Latter-day Saint, but sometimes I wish I was Amish, right? I could just take off and take my little family and go. It's tempting, yeah? We're not meant to huddle in our homes and churches and shut our children away from it all, as tempting as it is. We're meant to pray night and day, but prayer, it's simply not enough. Faith without works is dead. We must be the light on the hill. We must be the salt to the light, as Martin also mentioned. We must be his hands, his voice, and his heart. It's important that we eliminate the weakness of one standing alone and substitute it for the strength of people working together. And we've seen a little bit of a shift in Australia with the Israel Folau situation. People are starting to wake up. And sometimes it does take it to come to your doorstep, as it did mine with my children. But I hope that me sharing this message today, that you can take this out, that you can share it in your communities, that you can talk to your children, talk to your grandchildren, share the message, let them know what we're facing, and that we must unite and stand up. So here's some ideas here just quickly. So you identify the enemy, you speak into the culture. We have the best life, right? Family life is the best life. We got to speak into the culture, and Family First do a great job. Organise and activate. Consider joining a political party. Elect, support and encourage pro-family policymakers. Be brave, rise up. I've run out of time. I'm getting the nod. Here's some ideas, but I hope you get my message today. I believe we've got to put on the armour of God, and that perhaps, in fact, indeed, you were also born for such a time as this. Thank you.